Okay.
So, I'm comparing The Shabbat by Mary Jane Zedrapi and Recitative by Toni Morrison. Both, not quite yet. Both the graphic novel The Shabbat and the short story have aspects of racial and religious prejudice. They both take place during the time of their country's civil unrest, and they have many similarities, even though they take place on different continents. In The Shabbat, a little bit about the author, Mary Jane Zedrapi. She was born in 1969. She's actually a princess. She's the granddaughter of the last Qajar Empire of Iran. She moved from Iran to Vienna for her studies after she punched one of her teachers in the face for wearing jewelry. And then she moved to France after she was recently divorced in 1994. She's best known for her best-selling graphic novel memoir, Persepolis, which was later turned into a film. The setting of The Shabbat is in the city of Tehran, Iran, during the Iraq-Iran conflict, which took place between 1980 and 1988. Most of the residents fled the city, but few remained there for their education. Little summary. In The Shabbat, there is one primarily Jewish family left in around the same block of the city. The main character is a Muslim who is staying in the city due to her education. The residents of the city debated whether or not Iraq had missiles or Scuds during the Iraq-Iran conflict. The Iraq was funded by the Soviet Union, which most likely that's how they received their missiles. During the story, they're shopping one day, all of a sudden they hear an explosion. She runs back towards the house, and she looks around and she sees just ruins. And she realizes that her neighbors, the Baba LeVays, which was the only Jewish family left in the block with house, was completely in ruin. Her mother tries to change the subject and kind of hide that the family was completely killed during the attack due to it being the Jewish Sabbath or the Shabbat, which is we described later. Change that around. Can you go one more level? Like I said, the Jewish Sabbath or Shabbat is a day where they light candles, recite literature, and traditionally have 3 Jewish meals while exercising their freedom from their everyday chores and jobs. And then you go one more back to that. Sorry, I gotta switch that order around. And just a little thing about the Iraq-Iran conflict. Began in 1980 after Iraq and Iran always had border disputes. Iran just got through a revolution, so Iraq was trying to take advantage and become the more dominant Persian Gulf state. Israel, which obviously is a Jewish country, funded Iran throughout funding weapons and money and goods. The conflict lasted 8 years and was only settled after a UN treaty. Religious prejudice. Obviously, the Shabbat, the Jewish family, the Baba LeVays, were completely targeted during their Jewish holiday. Let's see here. Israel was the ally of Iran, which is why Iraq targeted the Jewish family. Primarily Muslim Iraq would know that the Jewish family would be home because during the Sabbath they'd stay home to participate in religious ceremonies. In the Recitative by Toni Morrison, a little bit about the author. She was born in 1931, and she primarily grew up in Lorain, Ohio. She was the first member of her family to go to college. She received her Master of Arts from Cornell University. She wrote many books based on the problems faced by Black Americans struggling with slavery in the aftermath in the U.S. In 1993, she became the first African American author to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. Setting: this takes place during the 1960s and 70s in many towns and locations within New York State, which included an orphanage, St. Bonaventure or St. Bonnie's, a Howard Johnson's, and a grocery store. Some of the main characters, Twyla and Roberta, were both in an orphanage in the early 60s. This had many state-funded cases, but they were not a state-funded case. They were known as the Salt and Pepper kids due to being a white child and a black child. The main aspect of the story took place around a garden where an older mute cafeteria worker was knocked down, called names, and kicked. This would stay with Twyla throughout her life. They both ended up getting out within a year and a half. Twyla and Roberta would meet up several different times, and they had many mixed results. During the first case of Howard Johnson's, Twyla was working as cafeteria worker of Howard Johnson when she meets Roberta, who was visiting Jimi Hendrix, on her way to see Jimi Hendrix with two males. Roberta shrugged her or pushed her away, wouldn't really talk to her, looked down upon her because she didn't know who Jimi Hendrix was. Later, they met in a grocery store where they were basically reflected back on their time at St. Bonnie's. But Roberta would say that Twyla kicked Maggie and called her name. She participated with the older girls. Later, they'd meet at a protest for the desegregation of the buses, where they chose different sides. And Roberta claimed that now Maggie, the cafeteria worker, was black, and that would still haunt Twyla until in the future. Next slide. A little bit about the busing incident. In 1974, the Supreme Court ruled that the busing had to be desegregated. This caused many protests, not only from the racial standpoint, but due to that individuals or students would have to be bused to possibly different schools just to correlate with the new desegregation quotas. Next, a little bit. The author never tells us which character is black or white. She makes each character possibly fit one stereotype and then possibly fit the other stereotype. It's always, nobody's unsure, and she, to this day, has never said which character is black, which character is white. And the racial prejudice takes place during the 60s and 70s was obviously is a major time for civil rights. One of the spots of racial prejudice in the story is when Roberta's mom, Mary, turns to meet Twyla's mom and completely turns around and won't even shake her hand. Another is often described as when they were commonly called the Salt and Pepper kids, and also when they go to get a cup of coffee after the grocery store, it was stated that they were just white and black girls going back getting a cup of coffee, reflecting on the good old days. Another instance was during the protests. Twyla says to Roberta, "It's my kids too. They're all going to school. We're all making sacrifices due to this issue of racial desegregation." Twyla also is haunted by the fact that she thought she kicked Black Maggie, which is only then said at the very end of the story that Roberta still believed to that day that she was black, but she did state that it was not Twyla that kicked and called her names. It was the Goo Gals, but she wanted to. And that's how the story left off.
Great.